Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to Getting Your Community on Board with Community Choice Aggregation, presented jointly by the Cornell Cooperative Extension and Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council, partners in NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities program. Today's program will consist of a brief overview of the CCA program and two approximately 10-minute presentations and up to a half-hour Q&A period with a panel of professionals who have experience in creating CCAs. Here's a list of our participants. I will introduce them individually in a few minutes. So for housekeeping items, please post questions to the Q&A as you think of them. They will be answered during the panel discussion after both presenters have spoken. Technical problems, please post in the chat. Links will also be posted in the chat. Part 1, Community Choice Aggregation, or CCA, is an agreement which allows participating local governments to choose their community's energy supply service and buy these resources in bulk to save money and or achieve other community energy goals. For example, they could specify energy source or integrate energy efficiency and distributed energy resources into their CCA. A CCA can be set up by an individual, community, or by a number of communities banding together to get the best deal. A CCA can be for gas and or electricity together or separately. Public Service Commission approved PSC CCAs are opt-out. Constituents are automatically enrolled unless they specifically request to be unenrolled or disenrolled. Assistance program participants may participate if the CCA is guaranteed to provide savings over non-CCA arrangement. Current ESCO customers or customers that have in place a freeze or block on their accounts must opt in. CCA agreements generally last 2 years, at which time communities can renegotiate, exit, or find a new provider. Communities negotiate for CCAs with service providers through an administrator. There are 3 ways to broker a deal with energy companies. One, county can broker for the municipalities within its jurisdiction, but this is not considered a CCA. 2 ways to do a CCA are to have a designated negotiator from within the community. And the other way is to the community or aggregate of communities may hire a professional program administrator from a provided list of eligible administrators. Administrators are paid through their negotiated energy contracts and not directly by communities. Here's a list of Public Service Commission approved administrators. Communities setting up CCAs must file an enacted local law authorizing the creation of a CCA with the Public Service Commission. Communities choosing not to use a professional administrator must also file with the PSC a CCA implementation plan and a data protection plan. Also, communities setting up a CCA need to engage in community outreach by providing information and education to prospective members over no less than a 2-month period and by mailing an opt-out letter to all potential participants after PSC documents have been filed. This presentation is coming to you today by way of the Clean Energy Communities program. Todd, Jenny, Rob, and I are all Clean Energy Communities coordinators who can help you with your filing your CCA with NYSERDA to receive points towards grants in our Clean Energy Communities program. Please get in touch if you're interested in working on a CCA. 2 of our program, we are fortunate to have Sue Hughes-Smith of Roctricity and John Wadach, Deputy Mayor of the Village of Lima, speaking from their experience with CCAs. Please note and hold your questions for the panel discussion after the speakers are finished. First, I'm going to introduce Sue Hughes-Smith. Sue Hughes-Smith is a longtime environmental educator and climate solutions advocate. Her background includes 20 years of teaching in the field of environmental studies at local colleges, environmental advocacy at the local, state, and federal level, and the co-founding of a climate solutions advocacy organization. Sue is co-founder and co-owner of Roctricity LLC, the local program manager for community choice aggregation programs operating in 7 localities. I'm going to turn it over to Sue now.
Okay, So thank you for having me and for the warm welcome, Gina. So my name is Sue Hughes Smith. My firm Roctricity is the local program manager for community choice aggregation programs that are 100% renewable and focused on electricity. We are a subcontractor for Jewel Community Power. And currently our programs are covering about 100,000 customers in the greater Rochester area. So we've been very excited with the success of our CCA programs. And I want to focus on the two different types of programs that we have helped to facilitate. So the first type is just electricity supply. And the second type incorporates community solar as well. So as Gina mentioned, community choice aggregation authorized by the Public Service Commission in April of 2016. Municipalities can aggregate energy demand and negotiate a bulk purchase of electricity. Most choose to do this through a third-party administrator because they already have data security agreements and implementation plans in place with the Public Service Commission. So it effectively, for our programs, it effectively switches the selection of the default electric purchaser, which is the supplier, from the utility's variable rate to a community-wide supply program that has a fixed rate. And I just make that distinction because a lot of folks, especially older folks in our community, still think of the utility as a generator of electricity. But of course, in the 90s, the state deregulated and the utilities no longer own generation. But if they purchase the electricity, they're described as the supplier. So eligibility for community choice aggregation programs is actually connected to the type of meter. And most residents and small businesses are eligible because they have the SC1 or SC2 meter types. One of the challenges for community members is understanding how their bill actually changes as they move into CCA programs. Some folks have been on ESCO supply programs before, so they're familiar with it. Other people are much less familiar with their utility bill in general, which has been a surprise. So a default electricity supply is the charge from the utility is removed and the new fixed rate is added to the end of the bill. In this way, it's like a substitution charge, not an additional charge. But because of the way it's displayed on the bill, some initially people might think that it's somehow an additional charge. So to any extent that you can help people understand their utility bills before launching your program, the better. Another challenge, of course, is that most people's utility bills consist of four major parts: electricity delivery, which pays the utility; electricity supply, that's what CCA is focused on; then natural gas delivery or natural gas supply. And the way that this looks, of course, the substitution without the CCA on the left, you can see for RG&E, for example, you have electricity delivery charges, all those things paying RG&E to do the work they do, followed by electricity supply charges. But once the CCA program starts, the electricity delivery charges are no longer followed by supply because those are now relocated to the last page of the bill. Okay, so in NYSEG RG&E, here's what the last page might look like. Or with National Grid, it tells the company name, how they can contact that company, and then we'll show just as one fixed number, the kilowatt hours and the rate associated with the program. So our CCA supply only communities include these. And you can see most of them have, well, they've all implemented 100% renewable programs as the default energy supply program. In Geneva, they actually offered their community a choice, three choices, but most people stayed with 100% renewable selection. The other thing I want to point out is the rate can vary from program to program. That is not my area of expertise, but what I can tell you is because of the timing of when we went out to market, out to bid for these programs, that affects pricing, as does utility territory. So even though, say, Brighton, which started their program at the height of the pandemic, really, we went to bid for them, they got, 4.3 essentially cents per kilowatt hour, fantastic price. 6 months later, the economy's rebounding, coming out of the pandemic. City of Rochester, just down the road, best price available at that time was 5.8. Now, as it turns out, still a great deal, especially for 100% renewable product and what the market has been doing recently. Okay, so the second type of program incorporates community solar as an additional component. Okay, so all of the CCA supply information would be the same, and then you layer on top of that access to subscriptions to community solar farms. In the case of community solar, utilities are essentially instructed to purchase the electricity that's being generated from solar farms if a solar developer has enrolled customers. So they're communicating with the utility, that triggers the utility to have to purchase that electricity. And then the customers are actually purchasing savings. It's much like the concept of a Groupon, where you might get like a $30 restaurant coupon and you only pay $20 for it. That's kind of the analogy for community solar subscription, where participants receive guaranteed savings or bill credits for supporting renewable generation. It acts independently of electricity supply from the customer's point of view. It helps support local solar farms, and it is located on the customer's bills in its own section, either miscellaneous or other. So it is not in the supply portion of the bill. So there's been some good advances for community solar. One is net crediting. So instead of traditionally over the past few years, if someone subscribed to a solar farm, they got the savings on their utility bill, but then the costs came in a separate bill that the solar developer was sending to the subscribers. Now that's all going to be consolidated onto the utility bill. So that's great from the customer's perspective. And for national grid territory, it will be listed as a transfer credit / charge, and there will be a subtraction associated with it. And in NYSEG and RG&E territory, they'll have 2 lines where it says CDG value stack credit, that stands for community distributed generation. That's the credit. And then below that will be the subscription fee or the cost of the community solar. And then the customer will see the net savings at the bottom. So we're not a fan of the terms the utilities are using, but those are the terms that, at least for the time being, are associated with community solar. So we're really excited to be helping both the Village of Rockport and the Village of Lima launch their supply and now their community solar component of their CCA program. They are leading the nation in their willingness and ability to launch this as an opt-out program in their communities. So everyone who's eligible, who's chosen to stay in, will get guaranteed savings on their bills as a result of supporting community solar in their area. So for Lima, these credits are starting to go onto bills this month. And then in Brockport, it's going to phase in March or July, depending on which solar field folks have been enrolled in. Okay, thanks so much.
All right, thank you very much, Sue. Sue has agreed to stick around as a Q&A panelist. Next, we have John Wadach. John Wadach is the current Deputy Mayor of the Village of Lima. He's served on the board for the past 5 years and has focused his efforts on clean energy, sidewalk expansion, water system upgrades, and a new village-wide fiber optic internet system. Wadach has been instrumental in helping Lima earn 5,000 NYSERDA Clean Energy Community Points. 2 of the high impact practices Lima completed were CCA with 100% New York State renewable supply and an opt-out community solar program. So welcome, John.
All right, thank you for having me. All right, participants, let me just make this pledge. After you listen to what I have to say, you're going to say, wow, if Lima of all places can get this done, certainly we can. So let me tell you a little bit about Lima, okay? It's kind of, we have a medium household income of about $58,000. It's a heavily conservative area. This is, or was, Donald Trump area. So we weren't historically a green or liberal community. This is a very, very red community. So 5 years ago, I ran to get on the board. And one of my main platform items was CCA. I figured, well, that's the thing I want to get done. So I'm going to be honest with the voters. I didn't know how they would take it, but somehow I was able to win that election by 9 votes. I don't know if it was my platform or the fact that my opponent broke her hip and couldn't campaign, but for whatever reason, I got on the board. And you can believe that since I was the only member of one particular party, the other 4 board members were a little skeptical of this guy with these new ideas. They had connoted environmentalism to increase cost. And my pledge to them was, I think we can do it and save money. So the very first thing that I did was I hooked up with the NYSERDA liaison, which was from the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Commission, and said, hey, come on down to our meeting and just explain that program to us, because there's several things in it that don't cost any money, and there was some grant money that was available. So they came down and described some things, and we got started into the Clean Energy Community Program. I think one of the first things we did, and the coordinator said, hey, start with the low-hanging fruit. Well, there was a piece of low-hanging fruit at the time. It was called Unified Solar Permit. It was a very easy addition to our code. And for doing it, bam, we got $2,000 right off the bat. So that got the momentum going. Then we did some other things like benchmarking and so forth, electric vehicle charging station. But then we started, then I knew, okay, now it's time to start trying to get into the CCA. There was a lot of, like I said, skepticism at first. Okay. The mayor, for instance, said, the only way we're doing this is if it's an opt-in, we don't want, telling people what to do and so forth. And I try to explain as calmly as I can that, well, right now, big government is telling you what to do because the default supplier has been selected for us. All we're doing in this process is giving people a choice and having local control over who supplies us with electricity. So, we got started with the idea. Now, you're not going to get CCA overnight. It took Lima about 4 years. Now you're saying to yourself, oh my gosh, that long? It's not going to take you that long because there were a lot of things that had to be developed, like Sue was saying, with the billing, consolidating billings, getting National Grid to agree to certain things. So that stuff is pretty much taken care of. And there's a lot of templates with communities to work off of. At the time we started 4 years ago, the only one that you could look to in the state was the Westchester County model. Okay. But anyway, we got started. And the process reminds me of jumping into a cold lake, okay? If you jump right in all at once, you get this shock and then you want to get right out. So I knew if I pushed too hard, too fast, the whole thing's gonna stop, Okay, so incrementally get the idea going with the group. Okay, so the first step, I said, hey, look, we can do the first step, which means pass a local law that gives us the ability to do community choice aggregation should we choose. The law does not force us to do it. It just gives us the option. Okay. So I said, this is not committing us to anything. It's just giving us an option, you know? So they went along with that and we got our law. Okay. Step one, check. Okay. That was easy enough. Well, we're a small community of 2,000 people, about 15 miles south of Rochester. We're all part-time board members. We don't have a paid administrator to do a CCA. So obviously we needed an administrator. And we chose Jewel Community Power as our administrator. And they came down to a few meetings to explain, like the Westchester County, what CCA was all about. And I got the board to put up to a vote, you know, to choose an administrator. And once again, I told the board, this is not committing us to CCA. The agreement even said, you know, you can opt out anytime. The village could opt out if, you know, we didn't come up with terms that were suitable. So I told the board, look, once again, we need an administrator if we want to go out and get bids and just see if this is viable. So there's no harm. You get an administrator. If we don't get bids we like, no harm. We don't go any further. It doesn't cost us anything. It didn't hurt the fact that I called about 15 people that were, you know, pro CCA and they had them pack the room at the time. And, you know, with that little bit of pressure, the board went along and now we had an administrator. Okay. So unfortunately, about 3 or 4 years ago, you know, there weren't any or many other communities around that wanted to aggregate with us. And the approximate 700 to 800 electrical customers in Lima just didn't have the market clout to garner any competitive rates from suppliers. So, you know, Jewel and Roctricity, they worked some things and tried, and, you know, all of a sudden, you know, it was like the dam just broke all of a sudden. It was about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And Sue came to me and said, you know, we've got this new thing, community solar, okay, that we could do. And and at first it was that double billing thing, which would be a hard sell. You know, trying to tell people you're going to save money on your bill by getting an additional bill. It doesn't work. Okay. It sounds like double talk. People don't trust politicians or elected officials anyway. So there was some work behind the scenes, and then the Public Service Commission got National Grid to start a pilot program with unified billing, like Sue said. So instead of seeing a charge and then a credit on 2 different bills, you just see a credit on your National Grid bill. I said, okay, we can sell that. So with this community solar, our residents, depending how conditions worked out, would get an 8 to 10% savings on their electrical bill for paying nothing. Okay, so that got our board's attention. Like, really? This almost sounds too good to be true. And I said, well, it's true. So let's go for it. Well, at that almost same time, Sue and Jewel came and said, you know, this is an opportune time to also work on your supply and do CCA for your supply side. And I said, yeah, that's exactly true, because by coupling the CCA with the community solar, it just made the argument a lot more powerful that we could save people money and have 100% renewable. Now, along the way, the other incentive has been the NYSERDA Clean Energy Community Program. Okay, so for getting certain points, you know, you get various awards. And to date, the Village of Lima, little old Village of Lima, has acquired $112,000. That is some real change for Lima. Our total tax levy is only about $500,000 a year. So this award from NYSERDA constitutes almost 20% of our annual tax levy. Now, one of the things I told the board is in order for us to get all that money, we have to go 100% renewable. So that was kind of like a tiebreaker. So if things were close, okay, as far as the pricing, hey, the fact that we're going to get almost $100,000 from NYSERDA, let's go for it. So we got to the point about a year ago, maybe a little less, where the bidding process began. Now, when you get to that point, it's very important to do prep, okay, with your administrator, because there's a very short window of time once suppliers give you a bid that you have to accept. So it's only like a day or so. So you have to prep ahead of time to know, okay, where's going to be our point where we say yes or no. So what we did is Roctricity helped with this. We created a spreadsheet to show, okay, all right, this is what we're paying, this is what people are paying now on their national grid bill. And okay, with the 10% savings with the community solar, we figured out the price per kilowatt hour above what National Grid was currently charging, that we could still say to people, you're going to be saving money. Okay, so that helped a lot. So we got into the bidding. We got some prices that were a little higher, but because of the NYSERDA money, because of the 10%, savings from the community solar, I got the board to go along with it, and we approved going forward with both the community solar and the 100% renewable New York State supply. Now, in retrospect, residents are actually saving over the first few months of this because of the volatility of the fossil fuel market. Electric rates in National Grid territory have been above our CCA fixed rate price, but they're not always going to be every month. And that's one of the other things, people have to understand, you're by getting a fixed rate as opposed to a volatile monthly, you can't ever say on a given month that the CCA is going to particularly save you. But over the course that we've been so far, we've saved money. We've gone to 100% renewable and supported community solar. And we really had to spend no money as a village and do very little work because Roctricity has done all of our community outreach for us. Jewel has done all the market research and all that computer and data security stuff. So it was just a turnkey thing for us. So it was a fantastic thing. And like I said, we did it here in Lima. And, if we can do it here, you can do it anywhere. And I would be happy and delighted for any of you to call, email me, or invite me out to a meeting. I'd love to come and help you. Thanks.
Thanks very much, John. As I mentioned earlier, John is sticking around for the Q&A, so please note and save your questions. Put them in the Q&A. Todd Nobby will be organizing your questions for the panelists, so please put them in the Q&A now. Thank you, Todd. We have questions people submitted during registration and ones that were submitted now. Todd will group the questions by their relatedness as much as he can on the spot. So our panelists will be John, Sue, and Rob Richardson. John and Sue have already been introduced, and I want to also introduce Rob Richardson. Rob Richardson, MPA, serves as the NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities Coordinator for the Genesee Finger Lakes region. Working through Regional Planning Council, Rob helps local governments implement clean energy actions, save energy costs, create jobs, achieve higher levels of sustainability, and improve the environment across 9 counties, Orleans, Genesee, Wyoming, Monroe, Livingston, Wayne, Ontario, Yates, and Seneca, region of New York State. Prior to this role, Rob served as the Assistant City Manager in Canandaigua, New York for over 3.5 years. In addition to his role as Assistant City Manager, Rob was appointed as the coordinator of the city's Climate Smart Canandaigua Task Force and the point person for all the city's environmental initiatives. During his tenure, he guided the city to recognition as both a NYSERDA Clean Energy Community and a Bronze Certified Climate Smart Community. Thank you, Sue, John, and Rob for agreeing to be our panelists today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so it looks like we're having a few questions come in. We've also had a handful of questions submitted by attendees when they registered for the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and start with those first, and then we'll address questions as they come up in our Q&A. So one of our first questions, and Sue, this will, I think this will be most suitable for you to address, is as demand for RECs is high and in low supply, what measures have been or can be taken to make 100% renewable ESCO pricing acceptable and close to the utility default pricing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I'm actually not the best person to answer that because I don't do the electric bidding. So the actual CCA administrators, who that's their professional expertise, would be better positioned to answer that question. If someone wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to get Jules' perspective on that. Certainly RECs are a fixed commodity. There's at least the tier 2 RECs that are typically used. And so, yeah, it's a challenge. If you have high energy costs, because you also have to purchase the RECs, it's hard to find a competitive product. However, Joule has been successful through their relationships with folks that own the RECs in being able to deliver 100% New York State renewable REC-backed products to communities across the state.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Sue.
Mm-hmm.
And we have one more also for you. And any other panelists, feel free if you have any insight, please chime in. But this next question is, I would want the Southern Tier to learn to use the experienced Joule negotiators in dealing with selected ESCOs for the best price. Would that be the case if Southern Tier municipalities were to be part of, would that be the case if Southern Tier municipalities were to be part of the Joule Community Power?
So CCA administrators are not restricted in any way by utility zone or operating in any part of the state. If a municipality wanted to contract with Joule Community Power, I'm sure they would be very happy to serve them.
Perfect. And Rob, I think a few questions also came in that I think you may be most suitable to address. So what if a community were to solely offer opt-out subscription community solar with no market-based product, that is no ESCO?
I might be best to answer that.
Okay.
I don't know, Rob. So right at the moment, the Public Service Commission, we're expecting them to make a ruling sometime in June and July as to how opt-out community solar programs will proceed and whether they need to be coupled with CCA supply programs or not. So at the moment, we're waiting for that new guidance and should know in June or July.
Perfect, thank you. And one more that was a pre-webinar submission. I'm going to leave this one open to anyone on the floor. Many municipalities in the Southern Tier have been part of MEGA's sole focus on price rather than renewable sourcing. How do you see that perception and experience being overcome?
Wow, that's a great question. When I was the assistant city manager in Canandaigua and we went through this process, we also had discussions with MEGA as a potential third-party administrator and provider. As our community is on the shore of a lake that provides drinking water to 70,000 people in the region and is also a huge driver for economic development and tourism, we were only interested in doing 100% renewable. So anyone who really came to the table with something other than that kind of lost points on their application because we made that pretty clear. There is a stigma that goes along with this to a certain extent, and some of it has to do with experiences like that. Some of it has to do with bad behavior of ESCOs in the early 2000s, 2010s, where they were taking people's utility bills and switching them without telling them. So there's really only one path, I think, to overcoming that, and that's education and continuing that conversation and re-engaging those communities, hopefully re-engaging those communities to let them know that there are options out there that are 100% renewable And there are administrators who will go and get that for you without trying to sway you in either direction about what you should offer. But it's also entirely possible that the experience that a community had might make them not interested in community choice aggregation. So it's a situation that I think if the door is still open, just kind of a talk about what the program actually can provide and how we can get them to 100% renewable. If it's a community that's not interested because of a bad experience, it might take time, or it might just not be something that the community considers, unfortunately. But there is an effect for having someone that would come into this a really cool opportunity like this and maybe not listen to communities or represent them in the way that they'd hoped. So that's a tough question, and it really would come down to the desire of each community that was involved to continue that conversation and leave the door open.
Thank you. I think your mention of education there is segues to our next question submitted by Chris Carrick, and this is specifically for John, but everyone can feel free to answer this if they feel that they can. But can you describe the public education process, and would you say that the village residents generally understood how the CCA program would work? Did you get many complaints or customers opting out? Seems like there's two parts to that question.
Yeah. Okay. So the community outreach was taken care of by Roctricity. We went through this process, in the height of COVID. So we weren't able to have in-person meetings, although I think we did at right before COVID, we had a few, but we did have Zoom meetings, multiple Zoom meetings that were advertised both in our news, local papers, on our website, and in social media. As far as the opting, people understanding, that's a big cross section of people. Okay, so in Lima we've got a whole gambit of different kinds of people. And like Sue said, some people don't really understand much about their electric bill and maybe don't care, whereas other people are scrutinize it, right down to last kilowatt hour. So from the village's point of view, our clerk did receive some calls of people confused, but she was able to refer those over to Roctricity. So Sue will probably be able to tell more about the cross section of types of calls and then what our opt out was. But I think our opt out might have been about 40%. But keep in mind, we were under a very disadvantageous point, because in our education, we had to benchmark against the previous 12 months, which was the height of COVID. And it was a 4.41 cent per kilowatt hour that we had to put up our 5.9 cent against. And that didn't look good. Okay. Now, the community solar component helped, but the way it worked, and Sue, I wish it didn't work this way, but is that people could cherry pick and take the community solar, and I think almost everybody took it and took the savings, and then not do the 100% renewable. Now, I described to people, if you did the two of them, you were going to be at about the same price as the national grid, even if it was down like 4.5, 5 cents kilowatt hour. But they just said, hey, I see guaranteed savings, I'm taking them. So now in retrospect, National Grid's prices have been above the 5.91 rate that we've had for the last 3 months. Okay. And I would expect in the future, especially with what's happening in Europe, volatility in the fossil fuel pricing, and you see it already, especially down in the Hudson Valley, New York City area, where prices of electricity have skyrocketed. So having this the security blanket of a fixed rate of 5.91 is a real plus. But Sue, if you want to talk about what type of calls came in and so forth, go. Yeah, you ought to do that.
Yeah, sure thing. We get two kind of categories of calls, and it doesn't really matter what community, a very liberal community to conservative Lima. Folks either just want out and they're calling you because it says call you to get out, and they just don't trust any change. They love their utility, whatever the case may be. You know, plenty of the kind of conspiracy theory commentary sometimes, but and then you have folks who just don't understand what's happening and they're looking for information. And those are really rewarding and enjoyable conversations. My staff doesn't really see any point in arguing with folks. If folks want out, we're happy to get them out. We'd rather them join again later when they hear how great it is from their neighbors, right? So we really enjoy those conversations where people are looking for information and want to understand it better, because as hard as you try, it's kind of like a village or a town board meeting. You can tell people all about these meetings and that they are not going to come until it seems important to them to come and listen. And so when you have them wanting to learn, you have some really, robust conversations, and those folks tend to stay in the program. And across the board, we've seen participation or people opting out between 32 and 36% from one community to another. There's just a set section of our population that I think is, happy just not to change anything. So,
and I would add too that I got from my desk, would in the position that I was in, I also received two types of phone calls. It was either, who do you think you are to tell me who to select for my utility? Or it was a resident just wanting to make sure that this is something that the municipality was actually sponsoring and was actually behind, which was a good sign because it meant that they were reading their mail. It meant that they were aware of the campaign that was going on. To Roctricity's credit, we also went through our public engagement process right at the height of COVID. And within 2 weeks, they managed to completely alter the entire plan to include virtual opportunities and virtual town hall meetings so that our residents still got the opportunity to weigh in and have their concerns heard. So we found that we didn't get a lot of pushback from the community. It was actually kind of quiet. We'd expected a lot more than we got. We had the same one or two people that would come to meetings and voice their concerns about community choice aggregation, but they were also the same one or two residents that come to every meeting and voice their concerns about whatever's on the agenda. So we didn't get the robust pushback that we anticipated, which gave us some confidence because it let us know that one of two things was happening. Either the outreach campaign that we were doing was working and it was reaching residents and it was satisfying their needs, or that they trusted what we were doing and were willing to go along with it because they knew that the city was acting in their best interest. So
yeah, I'd like to add one thing to what Rob is saying there, is that the opt-out process is very easy. There's many avenues to do it, by phone, by internet, by mail. Also, there's no penalty for opting out at any time in the future. So it's really, we're not forcing anybody to do anything, and they have all kinds of opportunities to opt out. So I can say from the village board, there hasn't been a single person who's come in person to a meeting to complain about it. Our clerk may have gotten some calls of confused people, but they were all referred to Roctricity. So now, no death threats, no nothing like that.
I think I always wish people were more interested ahead of time, but sadly they don't tend to be. But we try,
Perfect. And as always, I encourage everyone to use the question and answer on your Zoom if you have any questions that you'd like the panelists to answer. Oh, perfect. So we just got a question that came in. John, do you think you still would have had success if there had been no guaranteed savings associated with the actions and no municipal clean energy grant awards from NYSERDA? Essentially, was it possible to convince people it was the right thing to do, or did you need the financial incentive?
I need the financial incentive. In all the clean energy endeavors we've ever done, I convinced the board by means of financial spreadsheets. Never was the word climate change ever uttered from me. Saving the earth, that wasn't going to fly. Okay. So it was really the finances and the community solar that leveraged us into 100% renewable. And Sue, I don't know if you can talk whether the community solar will continue to be available to communities. I know there was some push. I have heard some push from the utilities that they wanted to take over community solar. So Sue, maybe you can speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, John. I know there's still quite a lot of solar planned for development in particularly national grid territory. What happens with, there are several petitions in front of the Public Service Commission, and the Public Service Commission has not ruled on any of them yet. So we're still waiting to hear how that will play out. So I can't answer more with more specificity, but I certainly hope, it's certainly our hope, and we think community choice aggregation largely, the ability of municipalities to direct community solar to their communities should be a power that municipalities should have the ability to do. So we're hopeful, but we don't know how that will turn out.
All right, thank you. And we had one more question come in. Did Lima or Roctricity consider bringing other municipalities into its program? Is Lima doing anything besides this webinar to encourage its neighbors and the county to do CCA?
Well, let me start with that, Sue. That has been our goal from like 4 years ago. We were trying to aggregate with as many communities as we possibly could. And the only one that we got to come to the dance with us was Village of Brockport. But maybe in 2 years when we renew, Sue, we would have even more market sway with more communities. But then again, at this point in time, as Jewel and Sue have mentioned to me, sometimes being a smaller CCA now has some advantages because of the more limited amount of renewable generation that's available out there. So yeah, Sue, do you want to add anything?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Lima and Brockport both had the advantage in terms of the community solar that they could access the community solar because they moved right away when the opportunity knocked. But also they're small enough that you could actually provide to everybody in pretty much one fell swoop that savings. Whereas like the city of Rochester, we'll need a lot of solar developed before we're able to, provide for even if you wanted just the low income folks in the city of Rochester, that would have to be phased in. So there's definitely an advantage to the villages when it comes to community solar. In terms of the supply, like the day we went to bid for the Village of Lima and Brockport, we had actually 7 municipalities that we were bidding for on behalf of. And the city of Rochester was one of them, so even in a separate utility zone, but that market clout helped to command, the better pricing. But even still, we didn't move forward with all 7 of them, and a lot of those communities, I think, are regretting that decision at the moment, given what's happened. But it's a municipal program at the end of the day, and they have to own it, and they have to be ready to move forward with it. And we can only do so much to provide, support and comfort with that decision-making process.
Yeah, just to go back to the outreach to neighboring communities, I have attended several meetings over in our sister village, Honey Eye Falls. We have a joint school district, Honey Eye Falls, Lima, and I thought I had convinced them to be on board. I mean, they are much wealthier, larger, highly educated community. I would have, if you looked at the demographics and said which of these 2 is going to have CCA, you would have certainly picked Honey Eye Falls. But because right at the last minute, they felt they didn't want to take any chances that this might somehow cost somebody more money. they booked out of it. But I continue to put articles in about our clean energy accomplishments in our joint paper, and trying to give them a little bit of peer pressure that, that, hey, if Lima's doing it, why aren't you?
I would just like to add too that sometimes the process of trying to aggregate with municipalities can complicate things and slow up a community. We were going to hop on an aggregation with several large suburbs in Monroe County. And when we were ready to move, their contracts and all of that were still within the corporation councils for those 4 communities. So we ended up moving on our own and aggregating with the Village of Victor. And that worked out really well for us. Had we waited to align with those other larger municipalities to potentially get that benefit, we would still be in negotiations in some of these communities, and we would be paying a much higher per kilowatt hour per hour rate. So there's also something to be said about if the momentum's there in your community and you guys are ready to move, that it's worth moving forward even if it's on your own.
And can I just add, you do not need an intermunicipal agreement. So long as you're all with the same aggregator or the same administrator, rather, the administrator's essentially just aggregating all of that demand into the bid. So don't think you need an intermunicipal agreement. No, you don't need that headache.
So moving on to our next question. Your thoughts, what are your thoughts about not getting better pricing the first time going to bid? Would they try again? How long should a community expect the bidding process to take?
So we went to market 3 times. When we were ready to go to market the first time, the commodity was at an all-time low and we couldn't get anybody to talk to us about a fixed rate. The second time we went to market, they came back with these very interestingly designed hybrid type plans to try and compensate for the fact that the market was still a little uncertain. The third time we went to market, we got a price and a term that we were really happy with. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think if anything, it gives you another opportunity to continue the engagement process with your residents, but also to be able to go back and say to them, hey, we went through this. We have your best interest in mind. We didn't get a price that we liked, so we're not signing anything until we do. So, it gives you more time to educate your residents, but also it does show them that if you need to go back to market to get a price that's good for everybody, that you're doing it with the best interest of the community in mind.
All right. Thank you, Rob. And John, if you had to go through the process again, would you do anything differently? Any major lessons learned this first time around?
Well, one thing on our we'd love to go through the public information part COVID free and actually have face-to-face or hybrid meetings. That would be just so much more helpful. Also, I know Sue and Roctricity were constrained in the verbiage they had to use in the correspondence. And, if there was some way to simplify that, once you get past 1 page of text, you're losing people. And then when you put all this jargon in there, for instance, okay, when you read the disclosure statement for the community solar, it doesn't just say, hey, you'll get like 8 to 10% savings. Okay, it says, there's a line that says fee. It says 90% of the solar credit. So someone reads that and thinks, you just told, someone called me actually and said, what do you mean? You told me this thing wasn't going to cost anything. And then you have to explain, well, there's 100% of the credits. You have to pay 90%. You get to keep 10, but it's these little bureaucratic things that, yeah, that's the right thing to say, but it's in a way that confuses and convolutes the thing. If the PSC could please agree on plain, simple language, please.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I agree. I think making sure that, language is clear and concise and, relatable to the audience is always in everyone's best interests. All right, well, it looks like we've answered all the questions that have been submitted. So we still have 2 minutes left. So if anyone else has any remaining questions, please submit them to us. If you have any questions after this webinar has ended also, please feel free to reach out to myself or Gina Cassidy or your local clean energy community coordinator. And I believe John and Sue have both offered
Absolutely.
to answer any questions, and have offered to be contacted by you to answer any questions you may have. And we will be sharing out this webinar and contact information shortly.
Just thanks for having me and for putting together this webinar. Appreciate it.
All right, it doesn't look like any more questions are coming in. Thank you to all of our attendees and our panelists for joining us today. Like Todd mentioned, we did record this, so we will be getting this available. I'll be sending it as an email link to all participants. It might take a little while. It's a long video to download, but we will get this out to everyone with contact information, and it also will be hosted on our Southern Tier CEC website as well. So you'll have access to that. But yeah, thank you all. Any last words from any of our panelists?
Well, I don't see that my contact information was there, so perhaps in your correspondence, you could put that, because I would encourage anyone interested in learning like a little bit more about a village that's gone through it. Email me or even give me a call. So hopefully that information, because I would love to hear from any or all.
Same goes for me. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has about my experience with the program, and my email was just on that last slide, so please feel free to reach out.